Okay, so Water and Dreams. Gonna do chapter 2 by Gaston Bachelard. Chapter 2. Comfortable. Deep waters, dormant waters, dead waters, heavy waters. In Edgar Allan Poe's Reverie, one must guess the painter to understand the picture. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer. 1. For a psychologist studying a faculty as variable, fluid, and diverse as the imagination, it is a great advantage to find a poet, a genius endowed with that rarest of all unities, imaginative unity. Such a poet, such a genius is Edgar Allan Poe. Imaginative unity is sometimes concealed in his work by intellectual constructs, love of logical deduction, or a pretension to mathematical reasoning. The humor demanded by indiscriminate Anglo-Saxon magazine readers sometimes hides a profound tonality of creative reverie. But as soon as poetry reclaims its rights, liberty, and life, Poe's imagination gains back its strange unity. In her detailed, profound analysis of Poe's poems and tales, Marie Bonaparte has revealed the dominant psychological reason of this unity. She has proved that such an imaginative unity consists of faithfulness to an undying memory, to an undying memory. It is hard to see how such an inquiry, which has overcome all anamnesis and penetrated beyond merely logical conscious psychology, could be improved upon. Therefore, I shall make extensive use of the psychological insights gathered together in Madame Bonaparte's book. But alongside this unconscious unity, there is, I believe, a further unity of expressive means in a work of Poe, a verbal tonality that gives his work an inspired monotony. Great works always manifest this double token. Psychology finds in them a secret focus, literary criticism, an original way of speaking. The language of a great poet like Poe is rich, no doubt, but it is hierarchical as well. Within the thousand shapes it takes, the imagination conceals a favored substance, an active substance that defines the unity and hierarchies of expression. There is no difficulty in proving that for Poe, this favored substance is water, or more specifically, a special kind of water, a heavy water that is more profound, dormant, and still than any other deep, dormant, or still waters in nature. Water, in Poe's imagination, is a superlative, a kind of substance, a true mother substance. The poetry and reverie of Poe can serve as models for identifying a major element of poetic chemistry, which would study images by measuring the density of their inner reverie, the intimate substance for each of them. 2. If I am not afraid of appearing too dogmatic, it is because the evidence is too good. In Poe's works, the destiny of his water images follows very closely that of his main reverie, which is a reverie of death. Indeed, what Madame Bonaparte has clearly shown is that the dominating image of Poe's Poetics is the image of a dying mother. All the other loved ones whom death took from him, Helen, Frances, Virginia, renew this primal image and reverie in its initial pain, which marked the poor orphan forever. Death for Poe is what is human. A life is described through death. In the same way as I shall show, his landscape is likewise shaped by this fundamental dream, a reverie that constantly returns to the dying mother. Yet this fixation is all the more instructive because it corresponds to nothing in reality. In point of fact, Elizabeth, Poe's mother, like Helen, his friend, Frances, his adopted mother, and Virginia, his wife, died in her bed, a perfectly urban kind of death. Their graves are in a corner of the cemetery, an American cemetery. It has nothing in common with the romantic cemetery at Camelunds where Lila rests. Poe, unlike Lila, did not find a beloved body among the rushes of the lake. Nevertheless, around a dead woman, and for her sake, an entire region comes to life by going to sleep. That is, by going to its eternal rest. A whole valley is hollowed out and filled with shadows, takes on fathomless depth, so as to bury human misery completely and become the land of human death. Material element finally invites death to approach, as though it were an essence, a life snuffed out, a memory so complete as to live on unconsciously without ever exceeding the power of dreams. Therefore, all water that was originally clear is for Poe. Water that must become clouded, water that will absorb black suffering. Running water is water destined to slow down, to become heavy. All living water is on the point of dying. Now, in dynamic poetry, things are not what they are, but what they are becoming. They become in images just what they become in reverie, in our interminable daydreams. To contemplate water is to slip away, dissolve, and dive. At first glance, the reader may believe that there is in Poe's poetry a variety of waters so universally celebrated by poets, specifically two waters, the joyful and the melancholy, can be found there. But there is only one memory. Heavy water never becomes light. Murky water never clears. It is always the opposite. The story of water is the human tale of a dying water. Reverie sometimes begins in the presence of limpid water, filled with vast reflections, bubbling with crystalline music. It ends in the bosom of a sad and somber water, emitting strange and dismal murmurs as it rediscovers its dead reverie near the water, like a submerged universe. also dies. 3. We shall now follow in detail the life of an imagined water, of a substance highly personalized through a powerful material imagination. We shall see that it embodies all of the traits of life drawn toward death, of life wanting to die. More explicitly, we shall see how water furnishes the symbol for a particular life attracted by a particular death. First, let us show Poe's love for an elementary water, for an imaginary water that attains the ideal of creative reverie because it possesses what could be called the absolute of reflection. In fact, when certain poems and tales are read, the reflection seems more real than reality because it is pure. As life is a dream within a dream, so the universe is a reflection within a reflection. The universe is an absolute image. By immobilizing the image of the sky, the lake creates a sky in her bosom. The water, in its youthful limpidity, is a reversed sky, where the stars take on new life. Thus, dreaming at the water's edge, Poe forms this strange double concept of a star isle, a liquid star, prisoner of the lake, a star which could be an island in the sky. To a dear departed one, Poe murmurs, "Away, then, my dearest, go I thee away, to lone lake that smiles in its dream of deep rest, at the many star isles that enjewel its breast." Where is reality? In the sky or in the depths of the water? Infinity in our dreams is as high in the firmament as it is deep beneath the waves. One cannot pay too much attention to double images like the star isle, the psychology of the imagination. They are like the hinges of a dream which, turning on them, changes its register, its matter. Here at this juncture, water grasps the sky. Through dreams, water comes to signify that most distant of homes, a celestial one. In stories, this construct of the absolute reflection is even more informative, since short stories often demand a semblance of truth, logic, and reality. In the channel which leads to Arnheim domain, at every instant the vessel seems imprisoned within an enchanted circle, having insuperable and impenetrable walls of foliage, a roof of ultramarine satin, and no floor, the keel balancing itself with admirable nicety on that of a phantom bark, which, by some accident having been turned upside down, floated on constant company with the substantial one, for the purpose of sustaining it. Thus, water, by means of its reflections, doubles the world, doubles things. It also doubles the dreamer, not simply as a vain image, but through its involvement in a new wondrous experience. Of course, an attentive reader may only see yet another worn out image. That is because he has not really taken pleasure in the delicious visual effects of the revelations. That is because he has not really taken pleasure in the delicious visual effects of the reflections. It is because he has not lived the imaginary role of this natural painting, this strange watercolor that moistens the most brilliant hues. How could such a reader follow the narrator as he proceeds with his task of materializing the fantastic? How could he board the ship of phantoms that suddenly glides beneath the real ship when the imaginary inversion becomes a reality? Reality, a reality. Split, hyphenated. Let me read that again. How could he board the ship of phantoms that suddenly glides beneath the real ship and the imaginary inversion becomes a reality? A realistic reader will not see reflections as an oniric invitation, impressions of lightness. If the reader made all of the poet's images real, if he put aside his usual realism, in the end, she would experience physically the invitation to travel. She too would soon be enwrapped in an exquisite sense of the strange. The thought of nature still remained, but her character seemed to have undergone modification. There was a weird symmetry, a thrilling uniformity, a wizard propriety in these, her works. Not a dead branch, not a withered leaf, not a stray pebble, not a lump of brown earth was anywhere visible. The crystal water welled up against the clear granite, or the unblemished moss, with a sharpness of outline that delighted while it bewildered the eye. Here, then, the reflected image is subjected to a systematic idealization. The mirage corrects the real. It removes stains and wretchedness. Water gives the world thus created a platonic solemnity. It also provides a personal character that suggests Schopenhauerian form. In so pure a mirror, the world is my vision. Little by little, I feel myself the author of all I see, while alone. All I see from my point of view. In the island of the Fae, Edgar Allan Poe acknowledges the value of this solitary vision of reflections. The interest with which I have gazed into the reflected heaven of many a bright lake has been an interest greatly deepened by the thought that I have gazed alone. Pure vision, solitary vision, this is the double gift of reflecting waters. Tyke in Sternbald's Voyages also underscores the meaning of solitude. If we continue this trip on the river of innumerable meanderings, which leads to the kingdom of Arnheim, we shall have a new impression of visual freedom. The journey ends in a central basin where the duality of reflection and reality is completely balanced. It is very worthwhile, I believe, to give a literary example of the reversibility that Eugene Jaws does not want to allow in the painting. This basin was of great depth, but so transparent was the water bottom, which seemed to consist of a thick mass of small, round alabaster pebbles, was distinctly visible by glimpses, that is to say, whenever the eye could permit itself not to see, far down in the invented heaven, the duplicate blooming of the hills. Once again, there are two ways of reading such texts in terms of a realistic experience and in a realistic frame of mind, by trying to call up from all the scenes that life has shown us one site where we could live and think like the narrator. Such a basis for reading makes this excerpt seem so paltry that the reader has to force himself to finish it. But such passages can also be read in harmony with creative reverie, in an attempt to penetrate to the one core of literary creation, thus communicating through the unconscious with the poet's creative will. Then these descriptions, restored to their subjective function and disengaged from static realism, give another vision of the world, or better, the vision of another world. Following Poe's lesson, we notice that materializing reverie, reverie dreaming of matter, goes beyond formal reverie. More briefly, we understand that matter is the unconscious of form. It is water itself, in its mass, no longer its surface, which sends us the insistent message of its reflections. Only matter can become charged with multiple impressions and feelings. It is an emotional good, and Poe is sincere when he tells us that in such contemplation, the impressions wrought on the observer were those of richness, warmth, color, quietude, uniformity, softness, delicacy, daintiness, voluptuousness, and a miraculous extremeness of culture. During this contemplation in depth, the subject also becomes conscious of his own intimate nature. This contemplation, then, is not an immediate feeling, an unrestrained fusion. It is rather a deepening perspective on the world and ourselves. It allows us to hold ourselves at a distance from the world. In the presence of deep water, you choose your vision. You can see the unmoving bottom or the current, the bank or infinity, just as you wish. You have the ambiguous right to see or not to see. You have the right to live with the boatman or with a new race of fairies, laborious, tasteful, magnificent, fastidious, the water sprite, guardian of the mirage, holds all the birds of heaven in her hand. The water sprite, guardian of the mirage, holds all the birds of heaven in her hand. A pool contains a universe. A fragment of a dream contains an entire soul. Upon arriving in the heart of Arnheim domain, after such an wondrous voyage, one will see the interior castle, built by the four architects of constructive dreams, the four great masters of the fundamental one elements, seems to be sustaining itself as if by miracle in mid-air, glittering in the red sunlight with 100 aureoles, minarets, and pinnacles, and seeming the phantom handiwork conjointly of the Sith, of the fairies, and Genji, and of the gnomes. But this slow introduction, which celebrates the glories of water's aerial constructions, makes it rather plain that water is the matter where nature, in moving reflection, evolves dream castles. Sometimes the building of reflections is less grandiose, then the will to fulfillment is even more astonishing. Thus, the little lake in Landor's cottage reflected so perfectly. All objects above it that were the true bank ended, that where the true bank ended and where the mimic one commenced, it was a point of no little difficulty to determine the trout and some other varieties of fish with which this pond seemed to be almost inconveniently crowded, had all the appearances of veritable flying fish. It was almost impossible to believe that they were not absolutely suspended in the air. Thus water becomes a kind of universal home. It peoples the sky with its fish. The symbiosis of images gives the bird to the deep and the fish to the firmament. The inversion which played on the ambiguous inert concept of the star isle here plays on an ambiguous living concept, the birdfish. Anyone who makes an effort to establish this ambiguous concept in his imagination will feel the delightful ambivalence that a thin image suddenly assumes. He will enjoy this reversibility of great water spectacles in a specific event. Reflecting on these musings that produce unexpected images allows one to understand that the imagination needs a constant dialectic. For a thoroughly dualized imagination, concepts are not centers of images which come together because of their resemblance to each other. Concepts are the points where images intersect at incisive and decisive right angles. Besides its intersection, this particular concept has one other characteristic. The fish flies and swims. This fantasy of the flying fish, an example of which I have already studied as it appears in its confused state in the songs of Maldoror, does not emerge from a nightmare in Poe's writings. It is a gift of the mildest and most leisurely of reveries. The flying trout appears with all the naturalness of a familiar reverie, in a narrative with no drama, in a tale with no mystery, in a tale with no mystery. Is there a narrative, even a story, in the work called Landor's Cottage? This example, then, is especially good for showing us how reverie comes out of and belongs to nature, how matter faithfully contemplated produces dreams. Many other poets have felt the metaphoric richness of water, contemplated in its reflections and in its depth at the same time. For instance, in Wordsworth's Prelude, are the words, as one who hangs down bending from the side of a slow moving boat upon the breast of a still water, solacing himself with such discoveries as the eye can make. Beneath him in the bottom of the deep sees many beauteous sights, weeds, fishes, flowers, growths, pebbles, roots of trees, and fancies more. As one who hangs down bending from the side of a slow-moving boat upon the breast of a still water, slicing himself with such discoveries as the eye can make. Beneath him in the bottom of the deep sees many beauteous sights, weeds, fishes, flowers, growths, pebbles, roots of trees, and fancies more. He fancies more because all these reflections and all these objects in the deep start him on the way to images, because from this marriage, the sky and the deep water, metaphors, boundless yet definite, are brought forth. Thus Wordsworth continues, yet often is perplexed and cannot part the shadow from the substance, rocks and sky, mountains and clouds, reflected in the depth of the clear flood from things which there abide in their true dwellings, now is crossed by gleam of his own image, by a sunbeam now, and wavering motions sent he knows not whence, impediments that make his task more sweet. How could this way of saying that water crosses images be improved upon? How could its metaphoric power be better expressed? Furthermore, Wordsworth develops this extended imagery to pave the way for a psychological metaphor that seems to me to be the fundamental metaphor of depth. Such pleasant office have we long pursued, incumbent o'er the surface of past time. Is it really possible to describe the past without images of depth? And could an image of full depth ever be obtained without a meditation in the presence of deep water? The past life of the soul is itself a deep water. And then, after seeing all the reflections, the dreamer suddenly looks at the water itself. Then he believes that he has caught it in the act of forging beauty. He perceives beauty in its volume, an internal active beauty, a sort of volumetric narcissism permeates matter itself. It is then that Turnix dialogue between Palomides and Aladdin takes on the full measure of dream power. Blue water is full of unmoving and strange flowers. Have you seen the largest one, which blooms beneath all the others? It seems to live a measured life. And the water. Is it water? It seems more beautiful and purer and bluer than the water of this earth. I no longer dare to look at it. A soul also is such a great substance, one dares not look at it. For such then is the first imaginative state of water in Poe's Poetics. This state corresponds to a dream of limpidity and transparency, to a dream of clear and happy colors. It is an ephemeral dream, both in the work and life of this unhappy man. We are now going to follow the destiny of water in Edgar Allan Poe's Poetics. We are going to see it as a destiny that makes matter more profound, increases its substance by filling it with human sorrow. We are going to see qualities of surface and volume opposed. Volume according to this astonishing formula, that is an important consideration in the eyes of the Almighty. The water will get darker, and in order to do so, it will absorb shadows in material fashion. Now let us leave the sun-drenched lakes and see how shadows suddenly affect them. One side of the panorama around the island of Faye stays bright. On this side, the water's surface is lit by a rich golden and crimson waterfall from the sunset fountains of the sky. The other, or eastern end of the isle was whelmed in the blackest shade. But this shadow is not due merely to the curtain of trees which hides the sky. It is more real, more materially realized by material imagination than that. The shade of the trees fell heavily upon the water and seemed to bury itself therein, impregnating the depths of the element with darkness. From this moment on, the poetry of form and colors gives way to the poetry of matter. A dream of substances begins. An objective intimacy digs down into the element in order to receive materially the secrets of the dreamer. Then night becomes a substance, as water is a substance. The nocturnal substance mingles intimately with the liquid substance. The aerial wood, the aerial world, the aerial world gives its shadows to the brook. Here it is necessary to take the word give in its concrete meaning. As with everything expressed in a dream, we must not be satisfied with talking about a leafy tree which gives shade on a summer's day and which watches over someone while he sleeps. In Poe's Reverie, one of the functions of the vegetable world for a living dreamer faithful to the dream's clear-sightedness, as Poe is to produce shade as the cuttlefish produces ink. The forest must spend each hour of its life helping the night to darken the world. Each day the tree produces and abandons a shadow, as each year it produces and abandons its foliage. I fancy that each shadow as the sun descended lower and lower, separated itself sullenly from the trunk that gave it birth, and thus became absorbed by the stream, while other shadows issued momently from the trees, taking the place of their predecessors, thus entombed. As long as they hold fast to the tree, shadows are still alive. They die when they leave it when dying, shrouding themselves in water as in a blacker death. Give us this day our daily shadow, one that is part of oneself. Is this not living with death? Death, then, is a long and sorrowful story, not merely the drama of a fatal hour. They waste away mournfully, and the dreamer beside the brook thinks of beings who render unto God little by little their existence, as these trees render up shadow after shadow, exhausting their substance unto dissolution. What the wasting tree is to the water that imbibes its shade, growing thus blacker by what it preys upon. May not the life of the Fae be to the death which engulfs it? It is important to note, in passing, this new inversion that attributes a human action to a material element. Water is no longer a substance that is drunk. It is a substance which drinks, swallows the shadow like a black syrup. This is not an exceptional image. It could be easily found in fantasies about thirst. It can give singular force to poetic expression, a proof of its profound unconscious quality. Thus, Paul Claudel writes, O Lord, have pity upon these waters within me, which are dying of thirst. Once we have realized, in the full meaning of the word, this absorption of shadows, then we must not consider as cosmic monstrosities than the Fathaline River of for Annie and elsewhere in Ulalume, the Scoriac River with its sulphurous currents, the Saffron River flowing by in the poems of Poe. Nor should we take them to be bookish images, more or less revived, of the river of the underworld. These images bear no marks of a facile culture complex. They originate in the world of primary images. They follow the basic principle of material dreams. Their waters fulfill an essential psychological function to absorb shadows, to offer a daily tune to everything that dies within us each day. Thus, water is an invitation to die. It is an invitation to a special death that allows us to return to one of the elementary material refuge. We shall understand it better when, in the next chapter, we have reflected upon the Ophelia complex. From now on, we must note the kind of continuing seduction that leads Poe to a sort of permanent suicide, and a kind of dipsomania of death, In it, each hour meditated is like a living tear that rejoins the water of regrets. Time falls, drop by drop, from water clocks. The world that time animates is a weeping melancholy. Every day we are killed by sorrow, the shadow that falls on the flood. Poe follows the Fae in her long trip around the isle. At first she held herself erect in a singularly fragile canoe and urged it with the mere phantom of an oar, while within the influence of the lingering sunbeams her attitude seemed indicative of joy, but sorrow deformed it as she passed within the shade. Slowly she glided along and at length rounded the islet and re-entered the region of light. The revolution which has just been made by the Fae, I continued I musingly, is the cycle of the brief year of her life. She has floated through her winter and through her summer. She is a year nearer to death. For I did not fail to see that as she came into the shade. Her shadow fell from her and was swallowed up in the dark water, making its blackness more black. And during his hour of reverie, this teller of tales covers the whole life of the Fae. Each winter, a shadow breaks off and falls into the ebony water, absorbed by the darkness. Each year, the misery grows heavier. There fell from her a darker shade, which became whelmed in a shadow more black. And when the end comes, when the shadows are in our hearts and souls, when our loved ones have left us and all the joyous suns have deserted the earth, when the ebony river is swollen with shadows, heavy with regrets and with dark remorse, will begin its slow and secret life. Now it is the element which remembers the dead. Without knowing it, Poe, through the power of his inspired dream, rediscovers the Heraclitean intuition that saw death in the tendency to become water. Heraclitus of Phasis imagined that the soul, even now in sleep, by detaching itself from sources of living and universal fire, tended momentarily to transform itself into humidity. For Heraclitus, then, death is water. To become water is death to the soul. Poe, it seems to me, would have understood this wish carved on a tombstone. May Osiris give thee cool water. Thus, by dealing exclusively with images, we are gradually able to grasp the hold which the image of death has on Poe's soul. In this way, I believe that I can supplement Madame Bonaparte's thesis, as she discovered the memory of the dying mother serves as an inspired motivation for much of Poe's work. It possesses remarkable powers of assimilation and expression. Nevertheless, if such diversified images adhere so strongly to an unconscious memory, it is because there is already a natural coherence among them. At least, that is my premise. Of course, the coherence is not logical, nor does it correspond exactly to reality. In reality, no one sees the tree shadows borne away on the floods. But Material imagination explains this coherence of images and liveries. Whatever the value of Madame Bonaparte's psychological quest may be, it is useful to develop an explanation of imaginative coherence on the level of the images themselves, at the actual level of expressive means. It is to this more superficial psychology of images, I repeat once more, that the present study is devoted. 5. What becomes richer becomes heavier. This water, enriched by so many reflections and so many shadows, is a heavy water. It is the truly characteristic way of Poe's metapoetics, the heaviest of all waters. I'm going to give an example in which imaginary water is at its maximum density, taken from the narrative of author Gordon Pym. This work, as the reader no doubt knows, is a story of travel and shipwreck. The narrative is weighted down with technical details of sea life. Many are passages in which the narrator, enamored of more or less accurate scientific ideas, ends up with a wearying excess of technical observations. He strives so hard for precise details that the shipwrecked men, when dying of hunger, still trace the progress of their misfortunes on the almanac. During my early education, I found nothing but boredom in this work, and although I have been an admirer of Poe since I was 20, I had never found the courage to finish reading those interminable and monotonous adventures. Once I grasped the importance of revolutions brought about by the new psychologies, I took up all of my former readings again, including first and foremost those that had bored the reader, biased by positivistic, realistic, scientific modes of reading. In particular, I reread author Gordon Pym, this time placing emphasis where the real drama is, where all drama is, on the borderline between the unconscious and the conscious. Then I understood that this adventure, which outwardly covers two oceans, is in reality an adventure in the unconscious, an adventure which is stirred in the night of the soul, and the book, and this book, which a reader guided by an education in rhetoric might take to be weak and incomplete, was revealed, on the contrary, to be the complete working out of a dream possessing unusual unity. Since that time, I have returned author Gordon Pym to its place among the great works of Edgar Allan Poe. Through this example, I understood with particular clarity the value of the new methods of rereading provided by the new psychological schools as a group. As soon as a reader is made aware of these new methods of analysis, he participates in widely varied sublimations, incorporating remote images which make the imagination take flight in many directions. Classic literary criticism impedes these diverging flights in its pretensions to an instinctive psychological knowledge, to a native psychological intuition that cannot be learned. It refers literary works to a well-worn, outmoded psychological experience, to a closed experience. It simply forgets the poetic function of giving a new form to the world that does not exist, potentially unless it is continually reimagined. But here is an astonishing passage in which no traveler, no geographer, no realist will ever recognize the water of this earth, the island where this extraordinary water is to be found is situated, according to the narrator, in latitude 83 degrees 20 knot, longitude 43 degrees 5 knot west. This water is the beverage of all the savages on the island. We shall see if it can quench thirst, if, like the water in the great poem Annabel Lee, it quenches all thirst, on account of the singular character of the water, runs the narrative. We refused to taste it, supposing it to be polluted, and it was not until some time afterward we came to understand that such was the appearance of the streams throughout the whole group. I am at a loss to give a distinct idea of the nature of this liquid, and cannot do so without many words. Although it flowed with rapidity in all declivities where common water would do so, yet never, except where falling in a cascade, had it the customary appearance of limpidity. It was, nevertheless, in point of fact, perfectly limpid as any limestone water in existence, the difference being only in appearance. At first sight, and especially in cases where little declivity was found, it bore resemblance, as regards consistency, to a thick infusion of gum, Arabic, and common water. But this was only the least remarkable of its extraordinary qualities. It was not colorless, nor was it of any one uniform color, presenting to the eye as it flowed every possible shade of purple, like the hues of a changeable silk. Upon collecting a basinful and allowing it to settle thoroughly, we perceived that the whole mass of liquid was made up of a number of distinct veins, each of a distinct hue, that these veins did not commingle, and that their cohesion was perfect in regard to their own particles amongst themselves, and imperfect in regard to neighboring veins. Upon passing the blade of a knife athwart the veins, the water closed over it immediately, as with us, and also in withdrawing it. All traces of the passage of the knife were instantly obliterated. If, however, the blade was passed down accurately between the two veins, a perfect separation was effected, which the power of cohesion did not immediately rectify. The phenomena of this water formed the first definite link in the vast. The phenomenon of this water formed the first definite link in that vast chain of apparent miracles with which I was destined to be at length encircled. Marie Bonaparte has not overlooked these two extraordinary pages. She quotes them in her book, resolving to the problem of the dominant fantasies that guide the storyteller. She then adds simply, "It is not difficult to recognize this water as blood." The idea of veins is expressly mentioned, and this land, which differing essentially from any hitherto visited by civilized man, still had nothing with which we had not been formerly conservant, but contained rather the things most familiar to all men, a body whose blood nourished us even before it was time for milk, that of the mother who sheltered us for 9 months. It will be said that our interpretations are monotonous and come back endlessly to the same point. The fault lies not in us, but in men's unconscious, which draws from its prehistory the eternal themes on which to embroider 1,000 different variations. Why is it surprising, then, if beneath the arabesques of these variations the same themes always reappear? I have insisted upon quoting all the details of this psychoanalytic explanation. It furnishes an enlightening example of organic materialism, so active in the unconscious, as I have pointed out in my introduction. For the reader who has studied Madame Bonaparte's great work page by page, there remains no doubt that the hemothesis, Hemoptyses, hemoptysis, which means medical term used to describe an act of coughing up blood. Hypothesis. Apologize. For the reader who has studied Madame Bonaparte's great work, page by page, there remains no doubt that the hemoptysis, which drew first Poe's mother, and then all the women he faithfully loved toward death, marked the poet's unconscious for life. Poe himself wrote, and blood, too. That word of all words, so rife at all times with mystery and suffering and terror. How trebly full of import did it now appear, how chillily, heavily disjointed at. Thus, from any foregoing words to qualify or render it distinct, disjointed as it thus was from any foregoing words to qualify or render it distinct, did its vague syllables fall amid the deep gloom of my prison into the innermost recesses of my soul. Therefore, it follows that for so scarred a psyche, everything in nature which flows heavily, painfully, and mysteriously is like blood, accursed like blood which bears death. When a liquid takes on value, it becomes related to an organic liquid. Therefore, there is a poetics of blood. It is a poetics of tragedy and pain, for blood is never happy. Nevertheless, there is a place for a poetics of valorous blood. Paul Claudel will give life to this poetics of living blood. So different from the poetry of Edgar Allan Poe. Let us give an example in which blood is a water that has thus been given value. We feel all water to be desirable, and certainly more than the virgin blue sea. This one appeals to that part of us between the flesh and the soul. Our human water, loaded with virtue and spirit, dark, burning blood. With Arthur Gordon Pym, we are, to all appearances, at the antipodes of inner life, sense of extreme contrast. The adventures require geographical settings, but the storyteller who begins with descriptive narrative feels the need of giving an impression of strangeness. Therefore, it is necessary that he invent, that he draw from his unconscious. Why could not water, the universal liquid, also admit an unusual property? The water so discovered will be an invented liquid. Invention, subject to the laws of the unconscious, suggests an organic liquid. This could be milk, but Poe's unconscious bears a particular, a fatal stamp. Valorization will be through blood. Here the conscious mind intervenes. The word blood will not be written on this page. Should the word itself be uttered, everything would turn against it. The conscious mind would reject it logically as an absurdity, experimentally as an impossibility, internally as a cursed memory. The extraordinary water that astonishes the traveler will then be an unnamed, unnameable blood. That is the analysis from the author's point of view. And from the reader's point of view, either, and this is far from being common, the reader's unconscious grasps the valorization of blood, making the passage readable, even given a proper orientation, deeply moving. It may also be displeasing, even repugnant, a reaction equally indicative of valorization. Or, on the other hand, this valorization of liquid by blood is lacking in the reader. The passage loses all interest, becoming incomprehensible. The first time I read this book, I was still positivistic. I saw nothing there but an overly facile capriciousness. Since then, I have come to understand that even if this passage has no objective truth in it, it has at least subjective meaning. A psychologist who labors to rediscover which dreams precede literary works must pay attention to this subjective meaning. Nevertheless, classic psychoanalysis, whose lessons I have followed in this particular interpretation, does not seem to take all the imagery into account. It neglects to study the intermediate zone between blood and water, between the unnameable and the named. Precisely in that intermediate zone where many words are needed to express oneself, Poe's passage bears the stamp of liquids truly experienced. Bears the stamp of liquids truly experienced. It is not the unconscious which suggests the experiment of slipping a penknife between the veins of this extraordinary water. That presupposes an actual experience of febrile water with a liquid which, although formless, has an internal structure and which, as such, eternally fascinates the material imagination. I believe it feasible to claim, then, that in his childhood Poe was interested in jellies and gums. He saw that a gum which thickens takes on a fibrous structure. He slid the blade of a knife among the fibers. He says so. Why not believe him? No doubt he dreamed of blood when he worked on the gum. but it is because he, like so many others, worked on gums that he did not hesitate to put into a realistic story rivers, which flow slowly. That flow, as though supporting veins like thickened water. Poe elevates a limited experience to the level of the cosmic, following the previously mentioned law of active imagination. At the warehouses where he played as a child, there was molasses. This is also a melancholy matter. One hesitates to taste of it, particularly when one has a harsh stepfather like John Allan. But it is fun to stir it with a wooden spoon. What fun, too, to pull and cut marshmallow. The natural chemistry of familiar matters gives its first lesson to dreamers who do not hesitate to write cosmological poems. The heavy water of Poe's Metapoetics surely has a component part that comes from a very childish physics. This point had to be made before we could examine more human and more dramatic components. 6. If water is the fundamental matter of Edgar Allan Poe's unconscious, as we claim that it is, it should rule over earth. It is the blood of the earth. It is the life of the earth. Water draws the entire countryside along toward its own destiny. As goes the water, so goes the valley. In Poe's poetry, the sunniest valleys grow dark. Once it smiled a silent dell where the people did not dwell. Now each visitor shall confess the sad valley's restlessness. Sooner or later, disquiet will come over us in the valley. The valley accumulates water and cares. A subterranean water hollows it out and shapes it. This latent destiny is why no one would like to live in any other of the Poesque places. No one would like to live in any of the Poesque places, as Madame Bonaparte puts it. As for the lugubrious places, it goes without saying, who would live in the House of Usher? But Poe's smiling landscapes are particularly as repulsive. They are too forced, sweet, too artificial. Nowhere does fresh nature breathe in them. To emphasize even more the sadness inherent in all beauty, I would add that in Poe's works, beauty must be paid for by death. In other words, for Poe, beauty is a cause of death. That is the story common to women, valleys, and water. The beauty dell, young and bright for a moment, must necessarily become a setting for death, the setting for a typical death. In Poe's work, the death of valleys and waters is not a romantic autumn. It is not made up of dead leaves. Trees do not turn yellow there. The leaves simply turn from a light green to a dark, material green to an oily green. That is, I believe, the fundamental color of Poe's Metapoetics. The very shadows often have this green color in Poe's vision. But on the pillars, seraph eyes have seen the dimness of this world, that grayish green that nature loves the best for beauty's grave. The fact is that, even where colors are concerned, death is Poe's works. Death in Poe's works is always set in a special light. It is death camouflaged in all the colors of life. In numerous pages, Madame Bonaparte gives the exact psychoanalytic definition of the notion of nature. In particular, she describes the specific meaning of nature in Poe's work. For each of us, nature is only a prolonging of our own primitive narcissism, which, in the beginning, annexed the nurturing, protecting mother, since for Poe, the mother had prematurely turned into a corpse. The corpse, it is true, of a pretty young woman. Why is it so surprising if Poesque scenes, even those most abundantly filled with blooms, always have something of the made-up corpse about them? It is, in such a natural setting, a fusion of past and present, of soul and things, that the lake of Auber, the most poesque lake of them all, reposes. It arises only from the inner geography, from subjective geography. It has its place not on the map of love, but on the map of melancholy and the map of human misery. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber, in the misty mid-region of Where. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber, in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Where. Elsewhere, the lake of fairyland, the same phantoms, the same ghouls will return. Therefore, this will be the same lake, the same water, the same death. By the lakes that thus outspread their lone waters, lone and dead, their sad waters sad and chilly, with the snows of the lolling lily by the mountains, by the grey woods, by the swamp, where the toad and the newt come, by the dismal tarns and pools, where dwell and ghouls, in each spot the most unholy, in each nook most melancholy. There the traveller meets aghast heated memories of the past. These waters, these lakes, are fed by cosmic tears that fall from all of nature. Bottomless valleys and boundless floods, and chasms and caves and titan woods, with forms that no man can discover, for the dews that drips all over. The very sun weeps on the waters, an influence dewy, drowsy, dim, is dripping from that golden rim. It is truly the influence of unhappiness that falls from the heavens onto the waters, an astrological influence, that is, a delicate and tenacious matter carried by the sun's rays, like a physical and material affliction. This influence brings to water, as alchemy might, the coloring of universal suffering, coloring of tears. It makes the water of all these lakes, all these marshes, into the mother water of human sorrow, the substance of melancholy. It is no longer a question of vague general impressions. It is a question of material participation. The dreamer no longer dreams of images, he dreams of substances. Heavy tears bring to the world a human meaning, a human life, a human matter. Here, Romanticism joins forces with a strange materialism. But here, conversely, materialism, imagined through the material imagination, takes on a sensitivity so sharp, so pained that it can understand all the woes of an idealistic poet. 7. We have just brought together numerous documents, and they could be easily extended to prove that imaginary water in Poe's metaphysics forces its psychological evolution on the whole universe. Now we must go to the very essence of this dead water. Then we shall understand that water is the real material mainstay of death, or through an inversion natural to the psychology of the unconscious, we shall understand in what a profound sense death is the universal hydra for the imagination marked by water. In its simple form, the theorem for the psychology of the unconscious that I am suggesting seems banal. It is the proof, I believe, that brings to light new psychological insights. Here is the proposition to be proven. Still waters bring the dead to mind because dead waters are sleeping waters. In point of fact, the new psychologies of the unconscious teach us that the dead, so long as they remain among us, are for the unconscious asleep. They are resting after the funeral. They are merely absent for the unconscious, that is, more hidden, more covered, more deeply sleeping sleepers. They awaken only when our own sleep gives us a dreamer, deeper than memory. We find ourselves alone with those who have disappeared in the land of the night. Some go far away to sleep on the banks of the Ganges, in a kingdom by the sea, in the greenest of our valleys, near anonymous and dreamy water. But they always sleep. The dead all sleep. The dead all sleep. At least as long as love doth weep, as long as tears on memory's eye. The lake with stagnant waters is the symbol of this total sleep, a sleep from which no one wishes to wake, sleep guarded by the love of the living and lulled by litanies of memory, looking like the sea, the lake, conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world awake. The rosemary sleeps upon the grave, the lily lolls upon the wave. All beauty sleeps. These youthful verses are taken up again in The Sleeper, one of the last poems Poe wrote, as befits the evolution of the unconscious. Irene has become, in this last poem, the anonymous sleeper, the dear, familiar, but nameless dead woman who sleeps beneath the mystic moon in the universal valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, the lily lolls upon the wave, wrapping the far about its breast. The ruin moulders into rest, looking like Lethe sea, the lake, a conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world awake. All beauty sleeps. Here we are in the very heart of Poe's metaphysical drama. Here the motto of his life and works takes on its full meaning. I could not love except where death was mingling his with beauty's breath. A strange motto for a man of only 20 years. It already speaks in the past, after so short a past, and yet gives the profound meaning of his whole life, the meaning to which he always remained faithful. Thus, to understand Edgar Allan Poe, it is necessary to make this synthesis at all the decisive points of his poems and tales: beauty, death, water. This synthesis of form, event, and substance may seem artificial, even impossible, to the philosopher. Yet it is found everywhere. If one loves, then immediately one also admires, fears, and defends. In reverie, the three causes which determine form, becoming, and matter are so closely knit that they are inseparable. One who dreams in depth like Edgar Allan Poe, has united them in a single symbolic force. This, therefore, is why water is the matter of a beautiful and faithful death. Only water can sleep, and all the while keeps its beauty. Only water can die, be still, and yet keeps its reflections. Reflecting the face of a dreamer who is true to the great memory, to the universal shadow. Water gives beauty to all shadows. It gives new life to all memories. Thus, a kind of delegated and recurrent narcissism is born, which makes all those whom we have loved beautiful. Man sees himself in his past. Any image for him is a memory. Later, when the mirror of the waters tarnishes, when memory blurs, withdraws, stifled, when a week or two go by, and the light laughter chokes the sigh, indignant from the tomb doth take its way to some remembered lake, where oft in life with friends it went to bathe in the pure element, and there from the untrodden grass, wreathing for its transparent brow, those flowers that say, I hear them now, to the night winds as they pass, I, alas, alas, pours for a moment, hear it go, in the clear waters there that flow, then sinks within, weighted down by woe, the certain shadowy heaven below. O thou phantom of the waters, the only limpid phantom, the only phantom with a transparent brow, with a heart which hides nothing from me, spirit of my river, may thy sleep, as it is lasting, so be deep. 8. Finally, there is a sign of death that gives the waters of Poe's poetry a strange and unforgettable quality. It is their silence, since I believe that the imagination, in its creative form, imposes a destiny on it, imposes a destiny on all it creates. I shall show through this theme of silence that the water in Poe's poetry becomes silent. The gaiety of water in Poe's work is terribly ephemeral. Did Poe ever laugh? Aside from a few streams which are joyous while still near their source, rivers quickly fall silent. Their voices soon lower, then progress from murmur to silence. This murmur that enlivens their confused life is in itself strange. It is foreign to the fleeing wave. If someone or something speaks at the surface, it is the wind or an echo, some trees near the edge, confiding their woes to each other, a phantom whispering low. For many miles on either side of the river's cozy bed is a pale desert of gigantic water lilies. They sigh one unto the other in that solitude and stretch toward the heavens their long and ghastly necks, and nod to and fro their everlasting heads. And there is an indistinct murmur which cometh out from among them like the rushing of subterranean water. And they sigh one unto the other. This is what is heard near the river, not its voice but a sigh, the sigh of pliant plants, the sad rustle of the greenery's caress. In a little while, the vegetable world itself grows quiet, and then, when sadness falls on the stones, the whole universe becomes mute through an inexpressible terror. Then I grew angry and cursed with the curse of silence, the river and the lilies and the wind and the forest and the heaven and the thunder and the sighs of the water lilies. And they became accursed and were still. For what speaks in the depths of a being, and from its depths, what speaks in the bosom of the waters, is the voice of remorse. It must be silenced. Evil must be answered by a curse. Anything that groans in and around us must be struck with the curse of silence. And the universe understands the reproaches of a wounded soul. It falls silent. The undisciplined stream ceases its lashing. The waterfall is humming. The river is singing. And thou, dreamer, may the silent enter into thee. To listen near the water to the dead dreaming is already enough to keep them from sleeping. Besides, does happiness itself speak? Does real happiness sing? When Eleanor was enjoying her time for happiness, the river had already conquered the gravity of eternal silence. We called it the river of silence, for there seemed to be a hushing influence in its flow. No murmur arose from its bed, and so gently it wandered along, at the pearly pebbles upon which we love to gaze, far down within its bosom, stirred not at all, but lay in a motionless content, each in its own old station, shining on gloriously forever. It is from this still and silent water that lovers seek models of passion. We had drawn the god Eros from that wave, and now we felt that he had enkindled within us the fiery souls of our forefathers, and together breathed a delirious bliss over the valley of the many-colored grass. Thus the poet's soul is so attached to water's inspiration that the flames of love must rise up from the water itself. It is the water that preserves the fiery souls of our forefathers. When a pale Eros of the waters rekindles two passing souls for an instant, then the waters for a moment have something to say. From the river's bosom issues, little by little, a murmur that swelled at length into a lulling melody, more divine than that of the harp of Ilias, sweeter than all save the voice of Eleonora. But Eleonora had seen that the finger of death was upon her bosom, that, like the ephemeron, she had been made perfect in loveliness, only to die. Then the tints of the green carpet faded, the ruby-red asphodels gave place to somber violets. Then the golden and silver fish swam down through the gorge at the lower end of our domain and bedecked the sweet river never again. Finally, after the tints, the flowers and harmonies are lost. Finally, in the realm of beings and voices, there is accomplished that watery destiny so characteristic of Poe's poetry, the lulling melody died little by little away in murmurs growing lower and lower until the stream returned at length, uttering into the solemnity of its original silence. Silent water, somber water, stagnant water, unfathomable water. So many material lessons for meditation on death. But it is not the lesson taught by a Heraclean death, by a death which bears us afar with the current and like a current. It is the lesson of still death, a death in depth that stays with us, near us, in us. Only an evening wind is needed for the water that has fallen silent to speak to us again. Only a moonbeam, soft and pale, for the phantom to walk anew over the floods